Angel's Den by Vivian Van Dam. Chapter 1. It was raining again. The thunder rolled above her head. The umbrella kept her mostly dry. It was her heeled boots and leggings that were getting most of the backwash. She stood on the sidewalk, waiting for the walking monitor to turn from the bright red to the safe green. For a city that was so busy, she was the only one left on that street. The car zoomed by her, and she could feel the weight of being alone for the first time in a long time. The city that never rests was finally at peace, even if it was just for a moment. She looked up her see-through umbrella and watched the rain plop on the clear plastic and slide down to the concrete at her feet. Her bright, starry eyes were the same color gray as the clouds, and her skin was kissed by the moon. She watched the storm clouds above her, listening to the cars passing her. She lowered her eyes back to the road ahead of her and watched the monitor turn from red to green. Taking that first step onto the crosswalk, she stepped right into a puddle that covered most of her heeled boot. The city water seeped into the fake velvet and went right to her ankle sock. It was the first of many things that went wrong for her that afternoon. But she kept her head held high and walked on. The cars were at a forced stop with a traffic light, and she kept moving. Though she could feel eyes keep moving on her skin, watching her like she was in a movie. It gave her goosebumps that ran all up and down her arms and legs. She tucked her loose hair behind her ears and kept going. As soon as she got to the other side, her skin started to crawl again, like she was being watched. And this time, it wasn't from the cars going by. Someone in the deep shadows of the city buildings was watching her. A chilly breeze crossed her legs, and she felt that shiver run down her spine. She never liked walking the streets during the evening. There were too many... Velvet? She paused in her stride for just a second, but kept moving, picking up her pace. She was so close to where she worked. If she could just keep going a little faster. "Hey, Velvet! I'm talking to you!" The voice was calling from behind her. She turned a corner. She bumped right into someone. She heard their sudden gasp as she let one out herself. The chilly wind blew a soft scent. A scent of teak that tickled her nose. It was warm, inviting, and a very strange scent for a place like this, in this city that never seen something like this. "Finally, I was wondering when you stopped moving." A gaspy, raspy voice was right behind her. "I was hoping to catch you before you went to work." She took one look at the person that she ran into and saw the deep set of his eyes, the square jaw and thin but sensual lips. His nose was a little bulbous, but it didn't take away from how endless his eyes were. She could feel her breath catch in her throat. She saw the deep scars that laid across his open collar and the single chain around his neck. His skin was a soft, woody brown that accentuated his light brown eyes. She was wearing a nice silk shirt, no tie, a black dress jacket, and slacks. His dreads were wet and messy, and he had a deep shadow across his jaw and chin. His brows were pressed together as if he, too, was thinking and watching her. "Your friend's calling to you." He motioned to the person who was standing behind her. When she glanced over her shoulder, her stomach sunk deep into her feet. The person who was calling out to her wasn't a friend, wasn't even someone she liked, but a customer. A customer she had thrown out the other night for placing his hands on something he just couldn't afford. Her. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath in, and gave the gentleman she ran into a smile. "I'm sorry for running into you. My deepest apologies." She gave him a light nod of her head and kept moving. Hey, Velvet, I want to talk to you." The man from the other night called out to her again. She was almost there, just a few hundred more feet. She could already see the sign place she worked at. Angel's Den. It wasn't fabulous to her, but it is for the men and the women who run this part of the city. The man caught up to her, and she could feel his hand wrap around her waist. He grabbed her with such force that she almost lost her balance. She turned around. "Let go of me!" Her voice was low, but her eyes were fierce. "You don't own a single part of me. You have no right to touch me." It was through her clenched teeth she hissed. The man had a nasty look in his eyes. His face was greasy, and he had a distinguished comb-over that looked rough. His brows were so thick that it reminded her of a rug, and he was so skinny that she could see his bones through his work shirt. His khakis hardly fit around his waist, even though he wore a belt. "Don't be like that, baby. I paid for you last night. I paid for your time. And I've been sitting here waiting for you to come to work all day." The man came closer. His breath stunk like cigarettes, and it made her stomach tighten with nausea. "I said, let me go. You bought 30 minutes of my time last night, and you went over. I don't know you. I don't care what you have to say." He dropped the nice act quick. "Come on, Velvet. You're just a dirty whore. Give me some more time, and I'll leave you alone. I promise. Your boss wouldn't mind. I already dropped three grand on you." Her eye twitched. She hated that name. She had hated it since the day her boss gave it to her. But she had no choice but to use it. It was her identity now, since Angel himself owned her. "I don't care. Don't make me get Charlie on you." Charlie was her personal bouncer that worked her side of the den. He was a big, muscular man who lived in the deeper parts of the city. He only speaks to her and Angel. Everyone else was a bag of meat to him. If they got too close to her, he would act. That is, till someone else bought her from Angel. Then Charlie was no more. She wouldn't be protected any longer. She would be someone else's property. "What if I bought you outright, my pretty little Velvet? You would have no choice but to listen to me, do what I say, when I say it, and how I say it." He came closer. She could see the yellow in his teeth. They were so dark they looked brown. His flesh was a deep jaundice color that made her want to retch. "You'd be my little... I have to get to work. If I'm late, Angel..." Someone cleared their throat. The man let her wrist go and looked over his shoulder. She knew his thoughts, believing the person was a peacekeeper, but it was the man she had bumped into earlier. His cold eyes never left the man's face. He had one hand in his slack pocket, while the other held his own umbrella. "Didn't the lady tell you to let her go?" The man who had held her captive just moments ago shrunk back into himself. Well, she did. Now get out of here." He pulled his hand from his slacks and reached into his belt. On his hip was a holster for a gun. Her stomach tightened and she backed up a step. "Else, I'm going to have to deal with this myself." She had never seen someone run so fast in her life. The man from the other night turned away and took off running into the road, nearly getting hit by a vehicle. She watched as he dodged an oncoming car, raising his hands as the car honked at him. She sighed and turned to look back at the man. He had put his hand back in his slacks and looked into her eyes. His eyes were such a light brown, yet they were so dark that it gave her chills. She gave him a slight bow of her head. "Thank you again. My name is Velvet. My owner is Angel." "I know who you are, and I know who owns you and where you work." He made a slight movement. There was no emotions in his eyes or in his face. "Now get going before Angel gets mad. He doesn't like it when his pets are late." She gave him another grateful bow before turning on her heels. Her heart kept beating so hard in her chest, she thought she was going to have a panic attack. Daring herself one last look. Maybe he's one of our regulars. Maybe... She glanced over her shoulder. He was gone. Where he once stood was empty, and the rain kept pouring down on the streets of the city that never sleeps. Angel's Den.